Tariffs keep changing faster than importers can react to them. Moving production sounds smart. That is, until you realize just how hard it is to replace what China offers. Now, today, we're going to talk about China Plus One and break down how to vet new suppliers in a China Plus One country. Hello and welcome to Supply Chain Signals, where we discuss the trends affecting supply chains and how they impact product quality and compliance. I'm joined today by our Insight Quality founder, Andy Church. So Andy, thank you for joining me today. The first thing we want to talk about is the continued uncertainty. In the last few weeks, the U.S. administration set a 10% tariff on lumber. They set 25% on cabinets and furniture. And then, before that, they put an additional tariff on India, bringing their total tariffs to 50%. And, India has been seen as an alternative to China for manufacturing in recent years. But since it's fallen out of favor with the administration, that makes things trickier for importers wanting to manufacture there. And of course, the US and China have been doing this negotiation for months, going from one tariff pause to the next. And it seems like things are still just constantly changing in unexpected ways. So, Andy, what are your thoughts and what is the lesson here for importers?
Constantly changing in unexpected ways. I'm not sure if I've heard it so eloquently put, Billy, but just the last 5 years have taught us that we are capable of dealing with change that we don't know what it's going to look like, how it's going to affect our business, beginning with COVID or the first tariffs, COVID that went on for a couple years, and now the whiplash we've endured the last 6 or 8 months with the continued tariff strategy by this administration. So it is not an easy answer. Obviously, a lot of companies are looking at moving their manufacturing out of China. There isn't going to be one country in the world, even the United States, that is ever going to be able to take back all of the manufacturing that takes place across categories that it is currently done in China. So as companies look at a China Plus One, a China Plus Two, whatever, a China Plus strategy, it is important to also include in their due diligence a political assessment, maybe a SWOT analysis that I would not have thought years ago that we would be recommending including as part of a supplier due diligence effort when looking at adding a new supplier to their matrix. What are the politics like in the country or countries that you're considering moving your production to? Are they currently in favor or out of favor with the current administration in the U.S.? Is that a pro or con? Or what are things that could happen? I mean, with a relationship with the U.S., and how can it impact your supply chain strategy?
Yeah, that's a really great point there, Andy. Importers are definitely capable of change, but it's, of course, tricky. And yeah, that's an interesting thought about political assessments as importers strive for continued supply chain diversification. In my conversations with importers, it seems like the general consensus seems to be, of course, not to move away from China entirely, since that would be infeasible most of the time. But instead, it's about diversifying just a part of their production, as in a China Plus One, a China Plus Two, to reduce their risk and to always have options. So what is it about China that makes it so difficult to move production elsewhere?
What makes it so difficult to move production out of China to other countries, whether it be within Asia, South America, repatriate production back to North America, or even Europe, is that China has had 30 plus years to ramp up to where they are today. And, whether the Chinese economy is retracted a little bit, production is retracted, manufacturing is at the same size as now as it was last year, 5 years ago. So that's beyond the scope of our talks here. But it is important to understand that China just didn't happen overnight. It was 30 plus years of the U.S. consumers' buying needs being able to be produced in China when companies went to Asia and said, "Can you make this?" The Chinese said yes. If they didn't have the capability, they figured it out. And along the way, they've become very automated. Factories today are much more automated than they were a decade ago, let alone 20 years ago. And so a big part of the reason why it's so hard to diverse away from China is that they can produce dang near everything at an exceptionally level of quality. And so that is why we don't see one country, whether it be India with a very large population or smaller countries, also within Asia like Vietnam or Malaysia, Indonesia, be able to produce products across the spectrum. We see wood centralized in certain areas. Vietnam, shoe production was one of the first things that moved to Vietnam from mainland China because of tariffs. But then we also saw candles and home decor. We see a lot of wood coming out of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, furniture, frames, that type of thing. We see product categories being the focus on product categories kind of being country specific. There are countries that produce multiple categories. So as companies look at diversifying out of China or adding to their China supply chain, it's important to look at where your products are currently being manufactured. And if they're not currently being manufactured in an area where there has been some interest in producing your product or your materials that make your product, do you want to be that front leader and work through all the challenges that come along with being the first? Because it's very difficult to move suppliers within a country. It's more difficult as you move within a region to other countries. Now you have different personalities and cultures that you have to begin working with, ways of interacting with the consumer. But you put on top of that, that a country has not had a lot of experience in producing shoes, for example. Are you going to move shoe production to Pakistan? Probably not. Pakistan is pretty strong in apparel. Bangladesh is strong in apparel. So it's important to understand, is being a first mover to a region that has not particularly produced with your material or product, is that a benefit to you? The vast majority of our clients is going to be no. It's going to be an area where they don't want to have to go through all those other headaches. They'd rather go to a country that is already producing products in their category, whether it be LVT flooring, shoes, stainless steel, dog bowls, or pet products. So it's important to list out, get out the old yellow legal pad or old fashioned way, is just making a list of what's important to you. Where do you think your product is being made now? Why do you think that? From trade shows, from consultations or conversations with me or Billy as we're at trade shows, or our competitors, your competitors? And then what is the most important thing for you, or the most important things as you work with a new factory? Is it strictly pricing, the ability to converse and talk and communicate with their factory very effectively in as many words as possible? What's important to you? Most of our clients are going to say price and quality. I would say a fair amount of our clients are also going to say how they communicate, because they recognize the lack of communication or poor communication or difficulty in communicating with a service provider or a supplier is a very expensive endeavor. It takes a lot more time to go back and forth, whether within your own team or through a third party. So communication can be a very expensive lesson to learn, that it should be high on your priorities of finding new factories.
Yeah, great point there, Andy, about communication. And yeah, it seems like the companies that can really make those moves as like a first mover into a country for their category are really just the biggest companies. But small and medium-sized companies, they really have a much harder time doing something like that. And so when we're talking about assessing suppliers in new countries, for our clients, I've seen that some of them are interested in Southeast Asia, countries like Cambodia, which I remember visited recently, Malaysia and Thailand. Those seem to be kind of among the top alternatives that our clients are exploring. And so when you're working with a new supplier in any country, it requires a thorough vetting process. So, really, Andy, what role can factory audits play in that vetting process when you are assessing a factory in a new country?
The role that audits play in assessing a new supplier in a new country are significant because many of our clients find suppliers off of resources like Alibaba or other online sites that list suppliers or a trading marketplace. And a lot of times they may be dealing with a middleman and they don't know it. And that works for a while. The price is where it needs to be, the product's being shipped. But then their retail client wants to go to a factory audit. And now all of a sudden they're getting a lot of pushback from their point of contact about, oh, our factory can't handle an audit. It's, there's just a multitude of reasons, scheduling and on and on and on. And so, one aspect of the due diligence audit is making sure you know who you're dealing with. We have talked about audits in the past, and the main topics or benefits of an audit or capacity verification, capability, making sure the factory is who they say they are. Do they have quality systems in place? Do they have a social accountability program in place and that they're following it? Do they have a code of conduct that they're following? Again, part of supply chain. Over the years, we've seen structural audits as there's been tragedies where lives have been lost at a factory due to poor factory construction, locked exits. Environmental has become a major component of audits because we want to make sure that our factories are not producing wastewater that is not good for the environment. So environmental components have been a part of recent audits, and most recently sustainability. Does the factory have traceability and sustainability efforts, and are they documenting? So as you begin to look at, you have identified a potential couple of new factories to work with, incorporating an audit, making sure that they say who they are, they have the capability to do what they say they can do. Those are two of the customary, I would say, legacy components of due diligence audits that we've done. But it's also important to make sure that they have their quality processes in place, that their traceabilities. Have they ever been through a recall? Working with a factory in a new country that you've not worked in before, they may not be as mature. A lot of our clients have never been through a recall, and we hope that continues to be the case. But as your factory, as they produce for other clients, have they been through a recall and traceability? Are they able to trace back certain components or raw materials to the next tier, tier 2, tier 3, or to the original source? So due diligence audits are a vital piece of a new supplier onboarding process. Before you place your first order, before you make that final decision, this is going to be who your new supplier is. Get your boots on the ground. If you're not able to get your feet there because of the travel, you want to wait to visit until you actually have an ongoing relationship with the factory, consider using Insight to come in and conduct a due diligence audit to make sure that this supplier can meet your needs. They can communicate the way you need and desire. They have the capacity to grow with you. They're paying their team on time. They're not holding IDs or passports, and that they will have no issues making your product or passing your retailers on.
Absolutely. The key thing there that you said is you got to get your boots on the ground, whether that's through your internal team or with Insight, we can help with that. But the key thing is to really make those thorough assessments of all the things that you mentioned. With that said, I wanted to talk about something else, and that is Chinese New Year and planning for that. Because, every year the Chinese New Year comes around and it kind of requires importers to adjust their production schedules and shipping schedules. And, I'm here in China and we just wrapped up the Golden Week, which is one of the two big holidays in the country, and that has had an effect on schedules. But the other big one, of course, is Chinese New Year, and that's coming up in February. So, given that this holiday is 4 months away, what should importers be keeping in mind right now with regards to quality control specifically?
Good question, Billy. Chinese New Year, it always seems early to be talking about it, but I was just at a couple of our retail clients' locations here in the Dallas area this week that have Christmas decorations out. So I guess it's not too early. Shipping has been a struggle. It has been many things over the last 5, 6 years with COVID, disrupting the shipping cycles and where ships are. Peak times have evolved this year with the tariff announcements that the U.S. administration rolled out early in the year. There was a rush to get product out. Shipping rates went up. Traditionally, we're kind of coming out of a end of peak season for Christmas items or early spring items to have been shipped. And so now companies traditionally before Chinese New Year are looking at spring items, Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day, those spring, all the decor items, all the outdoor furniture, all this, the pool stuff that we incorporate. And all those orders have to be placed now. It's crazy to think about, oh, it doesn't need to be in the store until the last week of April. But if you need it in the store the last week of April, you better have already placed your order or getting ready to, because with 60-day lead times on average on the vast majority of consumer products, that's about what it is. Now we're looking at the middle of December, and then getting items shipped before Chinese New Year is always going to be more expensive. So you also are going to run into the factory labor challenges as employees traditionally work right up until the factory closes. Some employees might be headed off a little bit earlier. There's other obstacles there with the test labs. You're having items tested. The labs are running at capacity to ensure the test reports can be issued. Inspection service providers are running it all out the last couple of weeks before Chinese New Year. So, we typically around Mid-Autumn Festival and the Chinese New Year national holiday begin to discuss Chinese New Year. And this week, it so happened both Spring Autumn or the Mid-Autumn Festival and National Week were at the same time. And so it's not too early. It's not too early. It's never too early to plan your order cycle before Chinese New Year. And it's as important to plan your order cycle after Chinese New Year. Factories close down for usually more than a couple of weeks. It depends on the type of factory, how much orders they have in their queue, how busy they are. But the vast majority of factories shut down for 2+ weeks, 15 days. 15 days is the period from Chinese New Year Day until the Lantern Festival, which is based on the lunar cycle. And so typically it's at least 15 or 16 days. And if you're planning on placing an order with your factory to ship in the middle of March, and your factory closes down from 2 to 3 weeks for plus, and they don't go back to work to the end of February, you got to think you're ramping up. There's going to be quality issues. Where does your order fall in place with other orders? So it's as important to begin looking at orders immediately after the period of Chinese New Year as it is before. And the takeaway this year is don't get lax. Continue with your quality processes. Don't rely on the factory to make sure they're going to ship it right on time before they close. Because the only thing you could probably be guaranteed of is they'll ship it before they close. Factories want to make sure all the orders are out and all the money in so they can start off their new year, the new lunar year, on a clean slate with new orders, new production, and new invoices being paid. So don't get lax. Continue on with your quality strategies, processes you have in place. And if you're not currently inspecting orders, now is a good time to look at inspecting orders before the Chinese New Year to ensure that poor quality doesn't get slipped out within your order.
Yeah, that's a great point, Andy. It's definitely a thing where they need to be planning and they cannot be lax about it. So really that covers everything that I wanted to talk about today, Andy. So thank you for joining me to share your thoughts. And also thank you to our viewers. If you find yourself needing help to vet a new manufacturer, or you're struggling with quality at an existing manufacturer, or you want to get started inspecting for Chinese New Year, reach out to us. We'd be happy to discuss your situation and see how we can help you with audits, inspections, or other custom-tailored quality assurance services. So be sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this one. And until next time, take care.